Thanks, Brian. And I would like to introduce Chris Golden, who I think everybody's been waiting to hear from. So Chris is a career risk manager and recognized expert in both cybersecurity and third-party risk management. He took his commission in the United States Air Force after receiving a Bachelor's of Science degree in computer science from the University of Miami. He spent more than 2 decades in uniform, and after his retirement from the Air Force, he continued to serve in a number of technical defense contractor positions. Upon leaving the federal sector, Chris was hired by DTCC as their Director of Cybersecurity Strategic Planning. He then moved on to the healthcare sector, where he is currently the Director of Information Security, responsible for protecting the personal information of the members of Blue Cross Blue Shield. All of this in addition to the new full-time role voluntarily as a CMMC Accreditation Board founding member. Chris, welcome, and thanks for being with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So I'm going to jump right in because I know everybody wants to hear from you. I think just to start off, what is the status of CMMC as it relates to the accreditation body, and what can we expect to see here in the next 6 months?
The status is we're up and running. We incorporated in, I believe, February as a 501c3 nonprofit in the state of Maryland. We got the board up, 15 members of the board, of which you mentioned I am one of them. We're currently working all kinds of different projects with a whole host of other volunteers that have come in to form on the working groups for the various committees, from standards management to accreditation policies to how we're going to do adjudication to training, et cetera. There's a whole lot of things that have to be done here. And so for those of you keeping track on our website, cmmcab.org, we just opened up registration for C3POs, individual assessors, and some other roles. So we're starting to get the ecosystem built out as people want to volunteer to do these things and get the program up and running. You'll expect more training from us as we want to get all those folks trained and out the door and start doing assessments as soon as possible. So we're hitting our stride, we hope.
Any milestones or timelines you could share?
We're going to do our first draft training with some folks from the DoD, possibly even Andy and Katie from SEI and some of the other folks from APL starting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It will also include some DCMA assessors, and it's just our chance to give them the first look at our training. It's obviously, I'm 100% sure it is not 100% correct. They'll give us some good feedback, hopefully. The DCMA assessors will definitely be our doppelganger for the normal assessors. We'll be looking at training, so their assessments and their opinions are going to be very well taken. We'll make some adjustments, figure it out what's right, what's wrong, get it back into a sort of version 2, and then we'll start rolling that out, hopefully maybe the end of July, early part of August.
And we all know that COVID-19 got thrown into the middle of this thing. How has that affected the timeline? And we can ask Ms. Bosjanek about the DFARS hearing here in a bit. And what other current challenges or roadblocks are you guys facing?
Frankly, the COVID thing really hasn't had a huge impact. Our board members are fairly diverse in their locations. We've got 3 or 4 down around the DC area. I'm up in New Jersey, couple in Texas, 1 in Boston, 1 in Seattle. So we're pretty well spread out across the country to begin with. So most of our meetings would be virtual anyway, even if we weren't following social distancing and all the travel restrictions. So there hasn't been a huge impact to us. All the working group members, again, they're geographically dispersed all over the country. So it really hasn't been a big impact. We're certainly looking forward to getting back and doing some face-to-face stuff, which we got to do just a little before the crisis hit, but it hasn't had a huge impact to us. And I think you're right, Stacy will have some probably more information on the DFARS rule change process and possible impacts from COVID on that.
Got it. So you mentioned Monday, you guys released your website, got updated, and a ton of content came out, as well as the applications for the provisional program and beyond. And in addition to that, there's just been a lot of content in the past 6 weeks with the national conversations, answering a lot of people's questions that have been out there. Can we start just by you walking us through the different types of organizations, especially for those who maybe haven't seen every one of the national conversations or haven't been on the website recently, that the CMMC AB will oversee?
Yeah, so our charter is basically to oversee the CMMC program for the Department of Defense, and we're going to do that via 2 main lines of effort. One is to accredit C3PAOs, so the Certified Third Party Assessment Organizations. that will be part of the ecosystem to help the assessments happen. And then we're going to certify individual assessors. And so the individual assessors will have to take our training. They'll have to pass our exam, have to meet some other criteria before we're going to send them out into the wild and let them do assessments in the defense industrial base. And then they have to work for C3PAO. So the C3PAOs needs to understand where they fit in the ecosystem, how they need to do the things they do as the assessors are working with them, as they're working with us. And so those are the two main lines of effort. Obviously, there's a tremendous number of small details that have to be accomplished to do both of those simple things. And that's what we've been working on for the past 6 months or so. But those are the two main things the CMMC AB is chartered to do.
Okay, and then we also see the registered provider organizations and the registered practitioners, and then there's the whole licensing side. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, obviously, we don't have a lot of ability to influence who company A picks to help them get ready for a CMMC assessment. We assume that's going to be a fairly large part of the pie. But what we want to do is make sure those people that are hireable at least have an understanding of the process, at least have a basic understanding of the model. And that's what those RPOs and RPs are exactly for. They're not really necessarily for assessors. They're not for people that work in an IT department inside a DIB company. They are for those consultants that want to go provide consulting services to a DIB company to help them get ready. We're just offering that criteria as a competitive differentiator in the market. So at least they've been through some minor training to understand what the model is, how it works, et cetera, so they're not providing advice that really takes somebody in the wrong direction.
And do you have to be a registered an RPO or an RP to do advisory and readiness services?
No, absolutely you do not. Again, we really can't control that, but what we are offering is our stamp of approval that this person or this company has at least gone through the basics, understands what they're talking about, understands the nuances, and would be a good fit. But we can't get in the middle between a DIB company and their consulting firms in terms of who they might want. But we are offering it for a small price so they can come in and say, hey, we've done the training. We do understand it a little bit better than maybe our competition. Maybe you should think about picking us. But other than that, we're not going to get too involved.
Thank you for that clarification. And so FedRAMP, for example, has a conflict of interest where you cannot provide advisory services and obviously do the certification assessment or the authorization package prep on the same engagement. Can you be, and early on in CMMC, I think it was thrown out that you won't be able to be a C3PAO and what's now called a registered provider organization. Is that still the case, or can you be both?
I think we're leaning towards you can be both, but not for the same company. So if you're an assessor and you go do Acme Anvil and you say, hey, this is how you need to get ready for CMMC, you cannot, I repeat, cannot now go back and be their assessor. Right, there needs to be a bright black line there that separates those two activities. But being an RPO and a C3PO should be well within a lot of companies' wheelhouses, but you can't do it for the same company.
And you said you're leading that way. Any idea of when that will be stamped either way?
Yeah, not off the top of my head. Right now, we're just trying to get through this registration process. Once we sort of get that up, we'll start the process of actually picking who is going to be in and making sure that they're, all the other criteria that we have developed over the past few months, that they meet all those criteria, letting them know that they are actually now part of the ecosystem. They can start using that. And probably around that point is probably when we'll make those kind of determinations as to what exactly, those limits will be. The C3PAOs will eventually have to sign a contract with us. The lawyers have that contract, so as they get through that, we'll have that kind of language in there that prevents them from also assessing a person or a company that they have consulted for. And then the code of ethics, excuse me, also they'll sign. Also, we'll talk about those kind of conflicts of interest.
So you mentioned this provisional program a little, and you gave us a little bit of preview. Can you just walk us through what exactly it's going to be? We'll ask Ms. Bosjanek as far as number of contracts and from the DoD side, but from a CMMC AB side, what is the provisional program? How will it be measured? How will these initial assessors be selected?
Yeah, so it's going to be random. Everybody that raises their hand and registers on the website to be an assessor goes into a pool. We'll assign them a number 1 to N, and then we'll have a random number generator start picking numbers. So just like the lottery. So if you win the lottery, you'll be invited to the first training session. It's either going to be a one time 60-person training session or 3 20-person training sessions. We're not quite sure yet which way we're going to go on that. COVID obviously will have an impact. It'll probably be virtual, probably not will be in person, face to face. If you're one of those 60s, then 60 assessors, then you'll take the test, you'll pass the test, you'll be certified as a provisional assessor. And then once DoD makes the determination exactly which contracts will be requiring a CMMC score later this fall, the AB, will sort of act as the scheduler in the near term. That's not something we're going to do in the long term, but with the supply and demand kind of problem we're looking at, we've got to have a little bit more control in the near term. So we will then assign assessors to specific contracts that need to be looked at, or organizations that may want to bid on those contracts that need to be looked at, and we'll control that in the near term. Once we hit a certain critical mass of assessors trained, we will get out of that work and just let the market work and figure that out. And we don't need to be in the middle of that. But that's how the provisional stuff will work. We'll continue to refine the model of training. Once the provisional assessors are out there, they'll obviously give us their feedback. So we'll be into sort of version 3 of the training. Hopefully have that out towards the end of the year, and that will be the formal training course that people will then go through, on their journey to become professional assessors for us.
You mentioned kind of that supply problem potentially, and we hear this a lot with people reaching out and saying, I want to do this as a competitive advantage. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to certify at level 3. We'll talk to Ms. Balshanik. It's been said by the DoD, they're heavily going to control this initial Pathfinder program. Are there any goals on the CMMC AB side as far as that event-driven criteria as to when this thing will be opened up? A number of assessors, a number of contracts?
Yeah, I think we are thinking of a number, but we're frankly not sure what that number is yet. And again, it's a supply and demand problem. If we have 2 or 3 assessors that get stamped and certified, they can charge whatever they want. And we want to avoid that kind of stuff. We want to keep the prices as low as possible for the members of the Defense Industrial Base. And so that's why we're going to be involved with scheduling. So they can't just go out and do anything they want. They're going to have to do it sort of based on our schedule, and then based on how many contracts the DoD lets, how many bidders to those contracts, how many subs, et cetera, et cetera. And then we're not sure. At some point in the future, I would say probably towards maybe the end of next year, it would be the time that the gloves might come off in terms of us scheduling these things, and then we'll just sort of let the market determine it. But we don't have a specific number yet. We haven't noodled on that enough to give you a good answer.
And on the cost point, is there any sort of task to the CMMC AB to control cost of this, or will this really be an open market? There's been a lot of talk about this being a commoditized thing on the assessment side, but is that factoring into your guys' approach trying to control costs, or will this just be an open market?
So as a nonprofit, the cost to the AB, so the assessment organizations will be paying us, we think are pretty low and pretty reasonable. And so we're doing a lot of work to try to keep those costs as low as possible. But the contract signed between a C3 PAO and a member of the DIB that needs to be assessed is outside our hands. We will not be getting involved in that. So the market will set that. But again, in the initial term, since there's only going to be a very specific number of contracts let with the requirement and a specific number of bidders and a specific number of subs, we will control the scheduling of that. So it's not just the wild, wild west. And hopefully that will work to keep the prices down. But again, we're not going to get involved in sort of that contracting between the C3 PAOs and their people they're assessing.
And then last question that was actually asked in the last talk, the C3 PAOs, the data that they're gathering for the assessment, we've seen on that application that you have to have an impact level 4 system to be able to store some of this data. Is that, I think the way that Devin put it is it on behalf of the government, and so therefore it is considered controlled unclassified information? Do you guys have an answer to that yet?
Yeah, we thought it was, but Devin sort of made me question everything we've done for the past couple months. So at this point, I don't know. I'm going to have to go do some research. We're going to have to bring it to the board and have a discussion about it. But from what Devin said is that if that company, if that C3 PAO does not have a contract with the DoD, then none of the information they have on their systems would be considered CUI. Now, would that information be considered sensitive in a lot of other different definitions? Absolutely. And so we certainly want to protect it. But yeah, we're gonna have to go do some homework on that. His comment on that generated my 2 questions really quick, as this is near and dear to my heart. And he answered them pretty good. But I'll have a call with him here probably in the next 20 or 30 minutes when I'm off of this to start talking about that. But yeah, we have sort of been planning all along that it would be CUI, but this may throw a monkey in the wrench, and we'll step back and reevaluate with new information and come up with something else.
Good. Awesome. All right. So moving into the actual, and this is a question that came up as well, but into the assessments, and we have a lot of small businesses on the line that are worried about costs. They're going to go through this and are trying to figure out how to do it. It seems that there's two schools of thought to approaching CMMC, at least right now. One, which is follow the information, narrow the scope, and create almost a separate entity or enclave for sure to process, store, and transmit CUI. And that's like separate in the organization, and the rest of the organization just continues with their normal architecture. The other approach is your entire organization needs to be CMMC, and we're going to roll out these security controls for everything, even if there's employees not touching controlled and classified or federal contract information. Is there a recommended approach from the accreditation body? Can both pass an assessment?
Absolutely, both can pass the assessment. So we call the first instance an enclave. It's a smaller subnet of your major network that is somehow logically and or physically separated from the rest of the environment. And if that's the only place that you have CUI, then that's the only part that needs to be assessed. That would be the entire scope of the assessment. A lot of PCI DSS standards are worked like this. The company has all these systems, but there are only a few that actually process the credit cards. And so when their PCI DSS assessment is done, it's only on those systems. However, if your entire enterprise is going to have access to the information, meaning it is not logically and or physically separated, then you'll get an enterprise assessment, and we'll see how well you do, across the enterprise. But both are perfectly reasonable approaches, and both can pass the assessment.
Thank you. Another thing that kind of splits the defense industrial base, at least as we've seen kind of on the ground, is you have the organizations that are old school and very hesitant towards the cloud. And then you tend to have the opposite, where they're ones that are strictly cloud native. Any differences that can be expected for an on-premise type assessment versus a cloud native? And again, same question as far as recommended approach or thoughts from a CMMC AB perspective?
Yeah, there are no recommended approach. Both would be fully capable of achieving the requirements of a CMMC assessment. I would say there's a small advantage to using, if you're going to go to the cloud, using a FedRAMP certified kind of service, because we know what those controls are and you'll get credit for them. Right, that'll be part of the reciprocity decision that'll come out of the DoD soon. We expect, but if the access control for level 3 is these 5 or 6 things, and the FedRAMP cloud certified thing handles 3 of them, okay, you've handled 3 of them just by going to that cloud instance. As long as it's FedRAMP certified, we'll accept that. The others, you're still on your hook to get done. So it's not like you're completely whitewashing this and giving it to the cloud provider. You still have things to do. Any cloud security model is obviously a shared security model. Just sort of depends on where the pendulum falls on who's doing what, where, when, and why, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, either way would be perfectly acceptable, and either way is perfectly fine with passing an assessment. And even if you didn't go with like a FedRAMP cloud certified thing, if you went to your own private cloud, you can certify that according to the model, secure it where it could pass the assessment as well. Just take a little more work probably.
And along those lines with FedRAMP, because it just seems like there's a lot of confusion out there. So FedRAMP, the different levels, right? Low, moderate, high. Moderate gets the impact level 2, and now we're bringing in the DoD SRG and cloud computing guidelines, which is not certified for CUI. You have to get to impact level 4, which some FedRAMP moderate programs do. Is it FedRAMP moderate impact level 4 that will have the reciprocity and pass the controls, or is all FedRAMP going to give you at least some credit?
Yeah, so any discussion on reciprocity is really a discussion on risk appetite or risk tolerance. And since this is the DoD's way to manage risk in the supply chain, it is their call as to what they think is acceptable or tolerable in reciprocity. So if they tell us that IL4 and a FedRAMP moderate is acceptable to level 3 at these controls, we'll accept that and move on. But it's really their call.
Sticking to, and we'll ask Ms. Blasjanek that exact question. So somebody has done, or multiple people have done a good job of promoting solutions like, say, Microsoft GCC High as a one-stop solution for CMMC. Does the AB have a view on something like that? You've already mentioned that the government cloud, they should be looking at FedRAMP type services, but anything to say on these so-called one-stop solutions for CMMC?
Yeah, no, obviously we're not going to endorse any particular solution or any particular piece of hardware or software. So when the assessor shows up and opens up the assessment, if all the criteria is met with you're going with a single provider, congratulations. If they're not, then you're not going to get the certification level you're shooting for. So I would just say, make sure your self-assessment is very tight and you know what you're looking at and you know what it means, especially if you're sort of assuming your cloud provider is providing all that security stuff.
Have there been any talks about the AB ever pre-certifying certain solutions?
No, none at all.
Okay. And then based on Devin's conversation and following the information, if a system, let's stick with cloud, doesn't touch FCI or obviously CUI, does it need to be FedRAMP? Should I be putting my payroll system, for example, on the FedRAMP version of my payroll provider?
That is a completely business-related decision that we couldn't help you with. If you think it's best in your business model to do so, by all means do so. If you don't, then don't. We're going to look at where your sensitive information is, either FCI at the level 1, 2 level or CUI and above at 3 and above, where that resides. We're going to look for logical and physical separations of those systems. If we do not find logical and physical separation, we'll continue to go until we hit the boundaries. And then that'll be the scope. We'll evaluate whether you can protect that information at that level and tell you whether you can or not. But if you want to put your normal business systems in a cloud, it's your call which cloud you want to do it, whether you want to secure it or not. That is a complete business decision.
Got it. So taking kind of the step back to the bigger picture, CMMC, since the beginning and with every new compliance framework, standard regulation, there's always the fear that it becomes a checklist. And to date, it seems like that ends up being the case a lot of the time. Stakeholders of CMMC have said repeatedly that this will not be a checklist, but it's ultimately your guys' job or the AB's job to enforce that. And specifically, as Katie Stewart said earlier, the institutionalization of processes and the implementation of practices. How will that be accomplished? How are you guys going to doing things differently?
Yeah, so first of all, we're not going to train it that way, right? We're not going to train these folks to go do that. We're going to start with the first cohort. They're going to be very experienced cyber auditor professionals is our first cohort of trainees. And so we're starting with a very high knowledge level, high understanding of what's going on. Obviously, a lot of this kind of stuff can be more art than science, right? Checklist obviously would be more of a science, but how they all work together, what happens if this little problem here exposes itself over here? There's a lot of art to that that they'll go through. The assessment guides, the training materials, all that kind of stuff will help them lead to making those decisions and using their judgment. But we will not be providing a checklist to them to use. We will not be teaching them to use a checklist. So I think those are some of the things we're going to be doing to try to keep this as a professional judgment call on whether this company can or cannot protect the data the way that needs to be protected.
And getting into the quality of that, I guess, how do you maintain the quality? Because it sounds like you're saying, when I was in the Marine Corps, right, we always used to, we hated that the Marines were trained on the how, but not really the why. And the best Marines, especially in the technical fields, learned the why so that they could have the underlying fundamentals to be able to troubleshoot things. How do you, when you're creating an industry overnight that you're worried about supply, how are you going to control that quality of training all of these folks in a technical discipline?
Yeah, sure. We call that caging. And so basically everybody looks at the same thing the right way. So, let's talk about a DLP solution, data loss prevention. We want every assessor to look at a DLP solution the same way. How it's tuned, it needs to be sort of understood and given credit for in the same way. Are they using a 9-digit number to look for social security numbers? Or are they actually using exact matching to look for social security numbers? Those kind of things, we all need to look at that the same way. We call that caging. And that'll happen in a number of ways. Obviously, it'll start with the training. That's where we're going to build the culture into the assessors of how we want this done and what they should be looking for and what's given credit and what's maybe given a little bit more credit, maybe a little bit less credit. When they first go on site and do their assessors, there's going to be a ride-along program. Somebody from the AB will go with them and sort of observe what they do, right? Left seat, right seat is what we used to call it in the Air Force flying world, and see how they do and give them some feedback. There's going to be a couple QA steps, both at the C3 PAO level and at the AB level, and probably then at the DoD level of these things. Are they all sort of looking the same? Are they sounding the same? Are they being given credit for the same kind of things? Those will be the metrics we'll be pulling out of the data to look for. And then randomly, we'll probably go back on site. We're going to evaluate a company once every 3 years. in the CMMC model. And my guess is the AB will go visit a very small number of them outside that cycle and just say, hey, are you still doing okay? Did the assessment really say what they thought it said? If we go in a year later, a year and a half later, changes will have occurred, obviously. But we'll get a feel for whether they're still sort of on track to doing that thing. So between all those little gates, I think we'll do a pretty good job of caging everybody to make sure it's a very similar experience among DIB contractors, regardless of who they pick to be their C3PO and assessors.
It sounds like from what you're saying that there's going to be some leeway for the assessors to exhibit judgment in certain areas. Does that mean small fixes during the course of an assessment? We've said all along that you will certify to where you're at, but will organizations seeking certification be able to do small fixes maybe in the middle of an assessment based on the assessor's judgment?
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking at what we're calling the assessment window. I'm not sure we've settled on whether it's going to be 30, 60, or 90 days, but there's going to be a time there, but from the time you start to the time you end. And so if you come in as an assessor and say, hey, you're a little lax on your access control, for example, you need to address these 2 or 3 things, you've got that window to fix it. You have to bring the same assessor back from the same C3PO to now certify, that you have met those things, but there's going to be a window there for corrective actions to take place.
Great. I'm going to skip a few questions here because we're getting, as expected, a lot on YouTube, but I'll finish up with a few here before we open it up. It seems like one of the messages here is again, this from the DoD and the CMMC standard is get rid of legacy systems, right? There's DIB members out there that have World War II technology still. How will business justifications and mitigations be evaluated and treated?
They won't. Yeah, you either meet the standard or you don't. If you have a really great reason why you're still using a World War II ENIAC, that's great. If that can meet the standard, more power to you. If that cannot meet the standard, you won't get the certification.
Message received. What about the adjudication process that you mentioned? Do you guys know what that's going to look like?
Yes, we're starting to work that now, so it's not flushed out. But basically, if an assessor comes in and there's some kind of gross negligence on the assessor's part, it's not just a disagreement, right? You just say, hey, I think this meets the contract, and assessors, no, I don't think. That's a disagreement. We'll figure that out. But really, just gross negligent thing. There's going to be a mechanism for you to reach out directly to the AB. You'll skip the C3PO. We will then get engaged and sort of look at the evidence, see what's going on, whether we do that initially ourselves, whether we bring in a team of outside experts as sort of a panel to evaluate that dispute, or whether we set up some other mechanism. We're not sure yet, but there will be a panel of some kind of people that will meet, review the evidence, and make a determination as to who was right and who was wrong, and then let you people know as quick as possible, because we obviously know that there are contracts riding on these decisions, right? And so if you're going to get the yes vote, you need to know that as quick as possible. And if you get the no vote, you need to know that as quick as possible. We think there's probably going to be an extra fee for that. So, obviously, if we have to bring in outside experts to help us with this, those people will probably need to be compensated. So there will be a little fee to do the adjudication process, but it's really only for gross negligence kind of stuff. And we're hoping that we'll see a minimum of that, if at all.
Okay, 2 more before we open the floodgates. So this whole thing has moved incredibly fast. With that, there's been communication gaps at times that are often filled in by industry or media and aren't always entirely accurate. What's one misconception that you see out there still to this day, or that you've seen most over the course of this thing?
I think the biggest one we've seen over and over, and we're still seeing it today, is that we are part of the U.S. government. We are a nonprofit company chartered in the state of Maryland with 15 board volunteers at this moment. We are not part of the Department of Defense. We are not part of the U.S. government. So when people ask us, why aren't we following this particular government rule or that particular government rule, we go, well, we're not the government. So that's probably been the one biggest thing I've seen over the past 6 or 7 months.
Makes sense. And then finally, anything, we've got a lot of small businesses on the line. There's obviously the standard C3PAO, aspiring community that follows every one of these. But anything out there that you want kind of the small and micro defense contractors that are on the line to know?
Yeah, I would say do what's in your contracts now. Don't wait for CMMC to come on board. If you are under DFARS clauses, which would be basically level 1 in CMMC, follow those procedures. Get ready. Doing those things will help you get ready for your CMMC assessment. If you have CUI and you're sort of maybe a little bit bigger business, go follow the NIST 171 guidance. If you are following the NIST 171 guidance, we've only added 20 new controls to that NIST 171 guidance that you will need to get for CMMC level 3. So whatever you are responsible for doing now, go do that, and that will put you in a good position to get the CMMC certification you're looking for.
Thank you, Chris. All right, let's see as these questions start to come in. The first one, so what partnerships has the CMMC AB engaged in so far? What partnerships are planned, and what future RFPs perhaps can we expect?
Yeah, that's not something we generally talk about. Obviously, we'll end up partnering with a whole host of organizations, government agencies, international organizations. The list goes on and on and on. But that is generally not something we talk about until it comes out in RFP. So I would just say monitor the website. There's an RFP page there. Any new RFPs will be on that page.
Got it. Okay, this question is about levels 4 and 5. Is it expected that certifications will be good for 3 years for levels 4 and 5 as well? And when can we expect to see that? That might be a DoD question.
Yeah, it's probably more of a DoD question, but so far all our planning has been every assessment will be a 3-year assessment. So that would include 4 and 5, so I think.
Got it. Okay, you mentioned you can't be a C3PAO and RPO for the same company. What if it's for different products within the company?
You're probably getting into the lawyer side of this now, so I'll defer to the lawyers on that. Send us a note. I think there's a link on our website that's CMMC support at cmmcab.org. Shoot us that question. I think we'll have to throw that one over to the lawyers.
Got it. All right, there are a lot. Okay. Will the assessments include evidence collection from a sampling of systems, examples, configs, event logs, et cetera?
It could be. There are 3 typical ways in an IT or cyber audit that an auditor looks at things. They can interview someone and talk to them about how it's accomplished and accept that. They could examine something such as what you're talking about that, or they could actually test your systems to see what they do. So it really depends on the auditor and the audit plan as to which one of those 3, all 3, 2 of the 3, whatever they feel like they need to answer the question. So that certainly will be one thing, but there will be other ways the auditors will look to see whether those controls and processes are being followed.
Got it. Another question we had earlier today. So I'm a level 3 small business and I rely on an MSP to support my IT infrastructure. Does that MSP also need to be certified at a level 3 in order to continue supporting my business?
Yeah, so again, we'll go back to the logical and physical separation. We'll follow the data. If your CUI data goes to that MSP, then yes, they will have to be, assessed at the same level because now they have the CUI kind of data. Obviously, based on the conversation Devin had a little bit earlier, that may be up in the air. We'll see what happens with that. If that MSP does not have access to your data, but they do provide you other services, then they may need to be present at the assessment to answer questions. Could be virtually, obviously, but there may be some questions the auditor might have for the MSP that they need to answer, but they may not necessarily be in full scope for another assessment.
All right, I'm just going to keep going rapid fire here. At one point, Katie Arrington suggested that a level 1 assessment could be completed with an online tool rather than an assessor coming to your business. Is that still a possibility?
Unknown. Sorry.
Okay. If we are implementing CMMC with a contracting company, can we sign up for assessor training so that we're better prepared and learn about how we will eventually be assessed? Or will that be seen as a conflict of interest? Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. One of the certifications on the website now is what's called the CP, the Certified Professional, and it's just a day of training that allows you to understand the ecosystem, the model, what's going on, all that kind of stuff. It's generally directed at like an IT staff within a DIB company, so they understand what they're having to do to be, eventually assessed and pass the assessment. But it could be used for anybody. But anything that gets you more information about sort of how the whole process works is going to be valuable, and that's sort of what the CP or Certified Professional certification is all about.
Got it. Okay, in an enclave situation, will the assessor / C3PAO review the entire enterprise to ensure that there isn't CUI outside of the enclave?
I would assume so. Again, that's sort of an audit pre-planning decision that the assessor and the C3PO would have to go work with. I would think that if a DIB company can show them good logical and physical separation, then they'll probably accept it. If they show them lacks, physical and logical separation, there may be some question getting in the pre-audit world, but that's probably something between the auditor and the defense industrial-based company to figure out.
Okay, for an assessor question, can I be a 1099 to multiple C3PAOs if I'm a certified assessor?
Yeah, right now our requirement is that an assessor has to work for a C3PAO. I don't think we've got any guidance in there that you can't work for multiple ones. So I would say go forth and conquer.
Got it. Okay, so this is one from earlier. about the wording on the website being interpreted as you have to pay to get certified at level 1, then at a level 2, then at a level 3. Is it the case that you can just, you pay for whatever level you're trying to get certified at, or do you have to pay for each step?
Yeah, you just pay for what you need. So if you want to come into the CMMC program as a level 3, you just pay for the level 3. We just were showing that there are different price points for different assessments for us, because as the complexity goes up, we obviously have more cost to sort of monitor and do QA on that kind of stuff. So that's why there's different costs there for different assessment levels.
Okay. Will the actual assessment require a team to complete the assessment similar to the CMMI appraisal process? Have you considered duration of assessment?
That is something that should be figured out during the scoping discussion between the assessor and the DIB company. For a level 1 for a small company, my guess is one person for about a day or so is probably reasonable, but we're not going to get involved in that. So if that person says, hey, I can do this in a day, knock yourself out. If that person says, no, it's going to take me 3 days to do this, okay. But that's part of the scoping discussion and the pre-audit work between the company and the assessor to figure that out.
Okay. I think I know the answer to this one, but this is about conflict of interest again. So if somebody did a pre-audit on a C3PAO, does that preclude them from doing the actual assessment, even if no advice was provided on how to address any identified gaps? Okay.
Yes.
All right, this is the reciprocity question. And so earlier, Katie told us that, or Katie and Andy told us about, ISO 27001 or 27001, DIB CAC, excuse me. And then there was a question about ISO 9001, which I believe is more quality management. Is any reciprocity you've heard about with ISO 9001?
Again, there can certainly be reciprocity with a whole host of things, but it is the DoD's risk appetite or risk tolerance decision that will guide that. So we'll just wait guidance from DoD as to what they're willing to accept and what they're not willing to accept, and we'll execute that guidance.
Okay. Will the healthcare industry use the CMMC, and how will that overlay with health controls?
Yeah, don't know. Obviously, a lot of regulators are probably going to start looking at CMMC and they sell to themselves, hey, this is the DoD standard. If it's good enough for the military, it's probably good enough for whatever I'm doing. We don't know. So we've not been approached by anybody in the healthcare industry to say, hey, I'd like to get a CMMC assessment, or I'd like to map controls to HIPAA or something like that. So I think it remains to be determined, but there's certainly the possibility that a number of people or agencies, governments that don't want necessarily to deal with the U.S. government contracting on the DoD side, like the CMMC model and choose to use it. And we'll sort of see how that goes. But right now, we haven't had any conversations.
Okay. How is the physical environment assessment affected by telecommuting and quarantine work requirements?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I'm not sure we've got our arms around it. Generally, obviously, we're going to see, what kind of VPNs you've got set up, how secure are the pipes between your home offices and your remote workforce? What controls do you have in place at the remote workforce in terms of printing, scanning, that kind of stuff, would be, I think, in scope of the assessment. Policies, GPOs, the list goes on and on and on. There's a whole bunch of ways to sort of do this. There will be ways to do this in terms of an assessment. I'm not sure exactly what they are, but again, the assessor should be fairly experienced and well-trained to be able to figure these things out and determine what is in scope and what is not in scope for the assessment and go from there.
Okay. Will there be a tool released by the CMMC AB to assess your organization?
I don't think so. I'm not sure exactly what the word tool means here. It could be a lot of things, but I don't think so. I think there are a lot of players in the space that are already advertising their ability and interest in sort of helping you do the pre-assessment work. The model's out there, right? The model's been made public by the DoD. So if you've got a model, just follow the model and you should be able to do a lot of stuff you want. Again, for level 3, NIST 171 is going to get you really, really close. If you're not in that world, if you're a little bit below that in the FCI world, the DFARS clauses will get you really, really close. So just keep doing what you're doing. But I don't think we're going to be releasing a tool in the way I think I understand the way the question is.
Okay. If we have a multiple layer supply chain and CUI goes to the final level, do I include the supply chain in my CMMC boundary, or does each supply chain organization need to be CMMC certified?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So if you're going to bring your subcontractors into your network, they're going to work on your equipment, then they probably do not need to be another assessment for them because they're on your equipment, which was assessed in your assessment. If that's not the case, if they're on their own internal networks and their own systems and they're getting CUI data, then they would need to be assessed and achieve CMMC level 3 too.
How do I manage supply chain organizations based in countries other than the US?
So if they're contracting with the DoD, they're going to have to be CMMC, assessed. We are starting the process of looking at international assessors, people that can do it in their language, et cetera, like that. The initial sort of cohorts will all be American citizens. That's one thing we'd like to do, is to sort of keep this as US only as possible. But we do realize that, the F-35 is made in 35 different countries, whatever, they're going to have to be local foreign assessors that work there. Sending an American assessor that may not understand the culture and or the language doesn't seem to help the process at all. So we're working through that, but we don't have any good answers yet, but it'll have to come at some point.
Okay. Will there be standardized templates released for CMMC artifacts, for example, an SSP?
No, I don't think we're going to get involved in that. The assessors can tell you what artifacts they're going to be looking for during the pre-audit workup stage. And if they'd like to see your SSP, then they'll tell you that. If they don't want to see it, they'll tell you that as well. But most of those artifacts will be left at the company. We don't expect the assessors to be bringing any of those artifacts back into the ecosystem for the C3PAO or us. And so the DIB company will be responsible for sort of keeping that stuff, maybe putting it into a big file, hashing it, letting the assessor know what the hash value is and what the digital messaging format hash algorithm was that they used to do that. So at some point, something happens in the future, we can come back and say, okay, here's where the state you were at then. You've obviously changed things since then. That's normal. We expect that, but I think that's how we'll do that. But right now, it'll be probably a decision between the assessor and the DIB company.
This is a specific kind of control and technical question. But I'll ask it here. So I think I know what they're asking. So if they set up a cloud environment, an enclave and workstations, and say it's a FedRAMP certified impact level 4, and they have everything in place for CMMC, is it okay for that workstation to be accessed via BYOD if no information can be pulled down?
I think, again, it depends on the assessor. I certainly understand BYOD and all the good things and bad things that come along with that. If it is determined that is within scope, that part of the environment is within scope, then it's within scope. But that is something I think the assessor and the DIB company need to agree to as to whether a BYOD, part of that's going to be in scope. I would say if the CUI is flowing to the BYOD device, then it's in scope and it needs to be protected. You can containerize it. You could do a whole bunch of different things, obviously, on the security side to sort of prevent that stuff from spilling. But I think at the end of the day, it'll be a decision between the assessor and the DIB company as to what's in scope.
Okay. I think the last question, we still got some coming in here. Can very small subcontractors with 1 or 2 FTEs that need a level 3 cert be included in the prime audit?
As long as they are on the prime's systems and hardware, yes. If they are not, then they would have to be assessed have their own assessment.
Okay. At the end of the day, I think one of the questions, just to kind of close up here, unless others flow in, which they are, but how are you guys establishing metrics and determining what success looks like, both for the provisional program and beyond, especially as you start to hire staff and this becomes more than a voluntary board of directors?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've been thinking about metrics since day one, and frankly, we don't have any great examples for you yet. We'll see what the data says, right? When in doubt, start counting. So that's what we're going to start doing as we start doing these assessments, and we'll sort of get the feedback from the companies. I know everybody hates a survey, but that's probably one of the things you're going to have to fill out to get your CMMC certification level from us is how did we do? How did your assessor do? How was working with the C3PAO? It'll be fairly painless, but you'll be a requirement so we can gather those kind of metrics. What are the adjudications coming in? Or do we see the same kind of, a failure at a control level that is happening across multiple companies? Maybe we need to, rethink whether that control is being assessed right. There's a whole bunch of ones we could grab in there. We haven't got a full handful of what they're going to be yet, but we're certainly looking at them. So we'll let you know when we get there.
Chris, appreciate the time. I think just to close up, is there a good way, other than the website, for people with ongoing questions or just communication to be part of these surveys to communicate with the CMMC accreditation body?
I think the best way is the website. Lots of ways to communicate with us there. We also have a company LinkedIn page. CMMC AB on LinkedIn. There's a way to obviously, reach out to us and talk there. I'm the sort of stucky to answer the LinkedIn one. So if you reach out on LinkedIn, you're probably going to get a reply from me. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it. So just sort of pick what's best for you and come ask us. We're happy to help.